Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. In our recent lessons, we have begun broaching the topic of verb tense, learning that verbs in English all indicate the time in which an action occurs. More specifically, we have learned that time in English is broken down into three categories: past, present, and future. Today we will focus on one of those times, the past. Earlier classes have already introduced the past tense, but today we will examine this time in greater detail. And believe me, there is a lot of detail to be explored. What could be simpler? The past is the past is the past, right? Well, not quite. Actually, the past has many layers, and sometimes English language speakers like to distinguish between these layers in their writing and speech. When we have discussed the past up until this point, we have actually been discussing just one type of past tense. It's called the simple past. I walked, she ate, we thought. All of these verbs, even the irregular ones, are in the simple past. They indicate an action that happened at a fixed point in time prior to the moment of speaking or writing. What if, though, you wanted to show that an action took place in the past over a longer period of time? Or what if you wanted to show that an action happened repeatedly on a regular basis, maybe as a matter of habit? The simple past would not work for you in those cases. For these purposes I just mentioned, we use a different version of the past tense called the past imperfect. The past imperfect tense indicates that an action used to occur or occurred over a certain interval in the past. Take this sentence as an example, and here it is. I was brushing my teeth when my mom called me from downstairs. The verb was brushing shows the action taking place over a matter of some time, perhaps over a matter of minutes. At a certain point during this interval, the brushing is interrupted by a simple past tense action, the mom calling from downstairs. Often past imperfect tenses are used to distinguish a longer term action from an action that takes place at a fixed point in the past. Have a look at another example of the same verb structure. Here it is. I fell and broke my leg when I was skiing. Here, the action of skiing is an ongoing past tense action that gets unfortunately interrupted by two simple past tense actions, the actions of falling and breaking a leg. I've rearranged the order of the imperfect and simple past tenses, but the architecture of the sentence is basically the same as the previous one. Another common way of indicating an ongoing past tense action in English involves the phrase used to. For instance, you might hear English language speakers say sentences like, I used to go to the gym often, but then I stopped, or I used to drink a lot of water, but now I've switched to soda. That phrase used to is used to indicate an imperfect action in the past. But unlike the two earlier examples that we just looked at a moment ago, the phrase used to indicates a recurrent, repeated action in the past. You might even say that used to serves to mark an ongoing habit that a person has gotten into. I used to go into the office every day, but now I work from home. I used to go to bed early, but now I'm a night owl. I used to play squash, but last year I switched to biking. All of these sentences use the phrase used to indicate a habitual, recurrent past tense action that occurs over a period of time rather than at a single fixed point. Once you become aware of the imperfect tense, you will hear native English speakers using it constantly. Now I'd like to discuss a second important variation on the past tense. This other tense is called the distant past, or by its formal name, the pluperfect. Have you ever wanted to speak about two actions that took place in the past, but not known how to distinguish between the two past tenses? The distant past is your verb tense then. This version of the past is used to indicate a past tense action that happened prior in time to another simple past tense action. That all sounds a little bit confusing, so let me give you an example. I had already heard the news before I came home. The first past tense verb in this sentence, had already heard, is in the distant past tense. A second simple past tense verb follows later in the sentence. I came home. Here, the distant past is used to distinguish the hearing of the news from the coming home. Now, we don't exactly know what context this sentence was said in or what it was written in, but it seems from the construction of the sentence that whatever is happening at the speaker's home is rather important. Maybe the family has lost a loved one, for example. Or, in better news, perhaps someone has won the lottery. In either of these cases, the author of these words wishes to highlight the fact that hearing a certain piece of news happens before arriving back home. The construction of the distant past is rather interesting. It always starts with the helping verb had, that simple past construction of the verb to have. Then what comes next is called a past participle. In this case, the past participle is the word heard, a particular form of the infinitive verb to hear. So every distant past verb conjugation has this form. The helping verb had, followed by the past participle of the verb in question. Past participles are yet another important part of past tense conjugations. Now, usually the past participle is the same as the simple past tense conjugation of a given verb. Take the infinitive verb to walk, for example. The simple past of the verb to walk is formed by adding ed to the infinitive base, walked. And the past participle is identical to the simple past tense form of the verb, I had walked. Life is pretty easy in the world of regular verbs such as to walk. And life can stay pretty easy in the world of verbs like to think. To think is irregular in the simple past, as we can see in the correct sentence, I thought. But thankfully, the past participle of the verb to think is exactly the same as the simple past conjugation, I had thought. Now, where things get a bit more difficult is with irregular verbs like our old friend to be. The verb to be has highly irregular forms in the present tense, the simple past, and the past participle conjugations. The past participle of the verb to be is been. I had been. Or take the verb to drive. It's also quite irregular, with different forms in the simple past and past participle. I drove is the simple past form, while I had driven is the distant past. Our old friends to have and to do also have some irregularities. I had is the past tense of the first verb, and strangely, I had is the distant past. With to do, you guessed it, more strangeness. I did is the past tense, as we already know, and I had done is the distant past tense. I said you would learn English in these lessons. I never said English wouldn't be a weird language. The weirdness of English language conjugation is really a result of that hybridity that I discussed in earlier lessons. The more you learn about English, the more you will discover these strange, quirky, idiosyncratic verbs that have different forms in the different versions of the present and the past. You'll get used to things in time, I swear. Remember, English is a melting pot of different languages. It has two main influences, the Germanic tradition on the one hand and the Latinate on the other. But there are important other influences too. There are many English language words with Arabic origins, for example, not to mention the words and phrases that come from Chinese and its various varieties. I recognize that these quirks and idiosyncrasies can be frustrating. I'm not here to deny that, but I hope that, with time, the oddities of English will become one of your favorite parts of the language. There's nothing pure about English, and the language really does not erect walls around itself to exclude outside sources. It's my firm belief that this liberal openness is at the heart of the language and at the core of its strength. So while you struggle through verb conjugations in the past tense, just remember, this is the price we pay for the power of English. Well, that's enough philosophy for today. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Spread the word.